The evening was quiet when Keanu Reeves walked into the old restaurant near the corner of the street. It was the kind of place where the tables were worn down by years of conversations, where the lights were soft but carried shadows that sometimes made people feel smaller than they really were. Keanu came here not because it was fancy, but because it was simple. He always liked quiet corners more than loud places. He wanted a meal without cameras, without noise, and without people looking at him like he was not human. But that night, quiet did not last. As soon as he sat down, he heard the whispers. A group of men at the next table looked at him and smirked. They were not fans who admired his work. They were strangers who thought mocking him would make them feel important. Their words were not loud at first, but sharp enough to cut the air. "Look at him," one of them said, "pretending to be normal. He thinks he's special because of movies." Another laughed and leaned closer. "He is alone, just like they say. He has no family here, no crowd to protect him." Their laughter grew louder, and the people nearby started to notice. Keanu lowered his eyes and stayed silent. Silence was his shield. It was not weakness. It was his way of not letting anger control him. But silence also made others believe he would never respond, and that gave them courage to push harder. The waiter, a young boy who looked nervous, came to Keanu's table to take his order. The men mocked the boy, too, saying he was wasting time on someone who lived in the past. The boy's hands shook, and Keanu gently smiled at him, speaking softly. "It's okay. Take your time." The boy nodded, his fear softening for a moment because of that small kindness. Yet the insults did not stop. One man raised his glass and said loudly, "Hollywood stars always hide here when the world forgets them." People at other tables shifted uncomfortably. Some wanted to intervene, but most chose silence, afraid of conflict. That was when the door opened, and two women walked in. Ana de Armas and Sydney Sweeney entered the restaurant together, their voices quiet, their presence calm yet strong. They were not expecting to see Keanu there, but when they noticed him sitting alone, their expressions changed. They saw the tension, the mockery, and the way the men laughed at him. Ana exchanged a glance with Sydney. They both walked straight to his table. "Keanu," Ana said with warmth in her voice, "we were looking for you." Sydney smiled gently, pulling out a chair beside him. "We saved a place for you tonight," she added. The room shifted. The same people who had been mocking him now watched in silence. The men who insulted him frowned, their confidence shaken. It was not because of fame. It was because of how naturally the two women showed respect. They sat with him, not as if he was broken, but as if he mattered more than the noise around him. Keanu lifted his eyes, and though he had been silent the whole time, there was gratitude in his look. He did not need to speak. Their presence said enough. Ana leaned closer and whispered, "You don't have to carry this alone." Sydney added softly, "Sometimes kindness is louder than insult." The men at the next table no longer laughed. Their words lost power because respect had entered the room. Still, something deeper was about to unfold, something that would turn this night from a painful moment into a story of hope. And in that moment, as the soft lights flickered and the voices around them lowered, the real story began. Not about insult, but about how three people chose humility and respect over pride and anger. The restaurant grew quiet after Ana and Sydney joined Keanu. The laughter that once filled the air faded, replaced by uneasy silence. People who had looked away now turned their eyes back to the table, curious to see what would happen. Keanu still did not say anything. He never believed in fighting insult with louder words. His silence, though heavy, was not emptiness. It was patience. Ana placed her hand lightly on the table, her expression calm but firm. She knew silence could be misunderstood, and she would not allow it to be twisted as weakness. "People often forget," Ana began softly but clear enough for those nearby to hear, Respect is not about who is famous or who is not. It is about being human. Her voice was steady, almost gentle, but it carried weight that pressed against the mockery in the air. Sydney leaned forward, her tone softer than Anna's, but just as sharp in meaning. It takes strength to stay kind when others try to make you feel small. And that strength is what we see in him. Her eyes moved toward the group of men who had been laughing. They looked away, their confidence shaken. Keanu looked down at his plate, not out of shame, but because his heart carried memories heavier than the insults. He remembered times in his life when silence was his only companion, lonely hotel rooms, long nights after losing loved ones, mornings when the world outside moved too fast for his quiet steps. He had always carried pain with dignity, never throwing it at the world, never making it anyone's burden. And yet that pain still lived inside him, shaping his silence. Anna noticed the shadow in his eyes. She leaned closer and whispered, so only he could hear. You don't need to hold all of it alone. Tonight, we hold it with you. Her words were not grand, but they carried warmth that reached beyond the surface. The waiter returned nervously with the food. His hands still shook, afraid the men would mock him again. Keanu gave him the same kind smile as before and said, Thank you. You're doing well. The boy blinked, surprised that someone so famous, someone who had been insulted moments ago, could still find kindness for him. In that instant, the boy's fear turned into quiet courage. As the night went on, the men who insulted Keanu shifted in their seats. One of them muttered under his breath, He should have fought back. At least that would make sense. But the truth was clear. Keanu's silence and the women's respect had already taken the fight away from them. They had nothing left to hold power over him. The rest of the restaurant began to change. A family at the far corner whispered to their children about how kindness was stronger than cruelty. An elderly couple exchanged looks, remembering moments in their own lives when dignity spoke louder than anger. And the young waiter, now braver, began serving other tables with steadier hands. Still, something lingered in the air. A question, unspoken yet heavy. Why did Keanu choose silence? Why not defend himself with words or anger? Sydney seemed to sense the weight of that question. She looked at him gently and asked, Keanu, why do you always stay quiet when they try to hurt you? He paused, lifting his eyes slowly. The restaurant held its breath, waiting for his answer. And when he spoke, his voice was calm, steady, and soft, yet it carried a truth that would stay in the hearts of everyone who heard it. Because if I give anger back to anger, he said, then no one learns what peace looks like. The room fell silent, and even the men who had mocked him lowered their eyes. They did not clap, they did not cheer, but in their silence they understood something they had not wanted to see. But this was not the end. Outside the restaurant, life waited with more challenges. What started as insult inside these walls would soon grow into something greater, something that would test not only Keanu, but also Anna and Sydney, and everyone who had witnessed this night. When Keanu spoke those words, the restaurant carried a stillness that felt almost holy. Even those who came only for a meal now found themselves holding something heavier in their hearts. The men who had mocked him fell quiet, not because they respected him yet, but because they no longer knew how to laugh in the face of such calm truth. Anna looked around the room and noticed how people's expressions had changed. Some seemed touched, others seemed guilty, and some looked as if they were remembering their own mistakes. She felt a quiet relief, but she also knew this moment was fragile. It could vanish as quickly as it came if someone tried to break it with anger again. Sydney leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on Keanu. You always surprise people, she said softly. Not with what you do on screen, but with how you live off it. Her words brought a small, almost invisible smile to his lips. But just when it seemed the night would calm, one of the men at the other table slammed his glass down. The sound broke the silence like thunder. "Peace? Silence?" he scoffed, his tone sharp. "That's not strength. That's weakness. People respect those who fight back, not those who sit there quietly." His voice drew uneasy stares again. The waiter froze where he stood, and the family in the corner pulled their children closer. Tension returned to the air like a storm coming back after a pause. Anna turned to the man, her face steady. "You are wrong," she said, her tone firm but never cruel. "Real strength is choosing not to become the same as those who hurt you. Anyone can raise their voice, but not everyone can hold on to dignity." Sydney added, "When you insult, you plant bitterness. When you respect, you plant hope. Which one grows depends on what we choose to give." The man looked at them, his pride refusing to bend. But before he could speak again, something unexpected happened. An old woman from another table stood up slowly. Her hands trembled slightly with age, but her voice carried clear across the room. "I lost my husband years ago," she began. "He was a kind man, always patient, always gentle. People called him weak because he never raised his voice. But when he left this world, those same people came to me and said they wished they had treated him better. Silence is not weakness. Silence is a mirror. It shows people who they really are." The room grew even quieter. Keanu looked at the woman with deep respect, and for a moment his eyes softened in a way that revealed his own memories of loss. He knew what it meant to lose someone and carry their memory as both comfort and pain. The man who mocked them did not respond. His voice had lost its edge, and his anger no longer found a place in the air. Keanu finally spoke again, his voice soft but steady. "Life has given me pain, more than I ever asked for. But it has also given me people who remind me that kindness still matters. Tonight, it is not my silence alone. It is their voices," he gestured to Anna, Sydney, and the old woman, "that show the world we can choose hope instead of hate." The people in the restaurant began to nod slowly. Some smiled, some wiped their eyes quietly, and others simply held the moment as if afraid to let it go. The waiter, now braver than before, stepped closer to the men who had mocked and said, "Sir, maybe it is time to stop." His voice shook at first, but then it grew steady. The men looked at him, and for the first time that night, they did not laugh. They paid their bill quickly, muttering among themselves, and left the restaurant. The door closed behind them, and a calm relief filled the room. Anna leaned closer to Keanu and whispered, "Tonight, you taught more than you know." Sydney smiled softly and added, "Sometimes the world needs to see how hope is born, not in grand moments, but in quiet ones like this." Yet deep inside, Keanu felt a strange unease. He knew this moment had ended peacefully, but he also sensed that the lesson was not finished. Life often tested people again, and the next test was never the same as the last. The restaurant returned to its soft hum, but in every corner, people carried a piece of what they had witnessed. And outside, the night stretched wide, holding new trials waiting to unfold. The night air outside the restaurant was cool and heavy with the scent of rain. Keanu, Anna, and Sydney stepped out together, their steps slow, almost thoughtful, as if each of them was still carrying the weight of what had happened inside. The quiet of the street felt different from the quiet in the restaurant. Here it was wider, lonelier, and more uncertain. Keanu kept his hands in his pockets, his head slightly lowered. He had faced insults before, and he had faced loss greater than insults could ever give. Yet tonight was different, because he was not alone. Anna and Sydney had stood with him, and their strength had turned a moment of humiliation into a memory of hope. Still, He knew deep inside that the story was not complete. Anna glanced at him and said softly, "You stayed silent, but your silence changed everyone in that room." Keanu gave a faint smile, one that did not hide his sadness. "People forget," he whispered. "The world often remembers cruelty louder than kindness. I just hope tonight lasts in their hearts." As they walked down the street, they noticed movement ahead. The same group of men who had mocked him inside the restaurant stood by the corner, their faces shadowed by the dim light of the street lamp. They had not left far. They had been waiting. "So this is what strength looks like," one of them sneered. His tone was mocking, but his voice trembled slightly, as if he was trying to convince himself. "You sit there quiet and let women defend you? Is that what you call dignity?" Anna stepped forward, her eyes sharp. "It is not weakness to let others stand with you. It is strength to accept that no one should face insult alone." Her words cut through the night, steady and sure. Sydney joined her, her voice calm but firm. "You left the restaurant because you knew you lost there. Don't try to win back your pride by attacking again." The men laughed, but their laughter was hollow, less certain than before. One of them pushed forward, his anger bubbling. "You think words make you stronger? Life isn't a story. Life crushes people who don't fight back." Keanu finally lifted his head, his eyes calm but piercing. "Life already crushed me," he said softly. "I lost people I loved. I lost moments I can never get back, but it did not take away my choice. I choose not to crush others just because I was broken." The men fell silent for a moment, caught off guard by the raw honesty in his words. But pride is a heavy chain, and one of them still refused to let go. He stepped closer, too close, his voice sharp. "Then maybe tonight, silence won't save you." For a second, tension wrapped around them like a storm about to break. Anna and Sydney both moved closer to Keanu, not out of fear, but out of instinct, to shield him, to stand as a wall of respect between cruelty and peace. The street was empty, no one else to intervene, only the three of them against the pride of men who had already been shown another way, but still clung to anger. Keanu did not raise his hands. He did not prepare to fight. Instead, he looked at the man standing inches away and whispered, "If hurting me gives you peace, then you are already carrying a pain louder than mine." The man froze. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. His eyes flickered with something deeper than anger, something like shame. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke, the world holding its breath between cruelty and surrender. Anna placed her hand on Keanu's arm, grounding the moment, and Sydney stepped forward with quiet courage. "It is not too late," she said to the man. "You can walk away tonight with respect, or you can carry this darkness longer. The choice is yours." The man finally turned his head away. His pride cracked under the weight of truth he could not escape. He muttered something low and harsh, but it was not anger anymore. It was defeat. With a sharp gesture to his friends, he walked off into the shadows. The others followed, their steps heavy, their laughter gone. The street grew quiet again. Keanu let out a slow breath, as though he had been carrying the silence inside his chest. Anna and Sydney looked at him, both knowing this moment was more than just another insult survived. It was a test of patience, of dignity, of how hope can be held even when the world tries to break it. Sydney whispered, "Tonight was not about silence or words. It was about showing the difference between being strong and being cruel." Keanu nodded, his eyes distant. "And the world will test us again. Maybe not here, maybe not tonight, but again." And as the first drops of rain began to fall on the empty street, they walked on together, unaware that the next trial waiting for them would cut even deeper, not from strangers, but from a place much closer to the heart. The rain fell harder as they walked, each drop carrying the weight of silence that none of them wanted to break. The night had tested them once inside the restaurant and again outside on the street, yet something deeper seemed to follow Keanu like a shadow he could not escape. Anna and Sydney walked close beside him, each step steady, as if they knew he carried more inside than he ever showed. They reached a quiet bench under a street lamp, its light flickering in the storm. Keanu sat down slowly, his shoulders heavy, his eyes distant. Anna and Sydney sat beside him, waiting. They did not press him with questions, but their silence spoke of patience, of a willingness to listen when he was ready. After a long pause, Keanu finally whispered, "Tonight was not the first time I have been mocked. But what hurts most is not strangers. It is when it comes from people you thought would never hurt you." His voice cracked, not with anger, but with the weight of memory. Anna leaned closer, her voice soft. "Someone close to you?" He nodded slowly. "Years ago, when I was younger, I trusted people who stood by me. But fame makes some people see you as less than human. They expect you to be strong always, to never fail. When I showed weakness, when I was grieving, even those near me said I was not enough. They said silence made me invisible. Those words cut deeper than any insult from strangers." Sydney's eyes filled with quiet sorrow. She whispered, "Silence to protect yourself should never be mistaken for weakness." Keanu's hands trembled slightly as he spoke again. "I carry those voices even now. When the men mocked me inside the restaurant, I heard not only them, but also the echoes of people I once called friends. Sometimes I wonder if silence really makes any difference at all." The rain poured harder, streaming across the empty street, but the storm outside seemed small compared to the storm in his words. Anna placed her hand gently over his. "Silence alone does not change the world, but silence with dignity, silence with kindness, it plants seeds. Tonight we saw it. The boy, the old woman, even the families who watched. They will remember. Your silence gave them something to carry forward." Sydney added, her voice steady, "Hope does not shout. It whispers. But whispers last longer than noise. People may not admit it now, but in time, they will." Keanu lowered his eyes, fighting back the weight of doubt pressing inside him. Yet there was a faint shift in his expression, as if their words reached a place that had long been locked away. Just then, footsteps echoed across the wet pavement. A figure approached slowly from the shadows. It was not one of the men from before. It was someone older, someone familiar to Keanu. The flickering street lamp revealed his face, lined with age and regret. "Keanu," the man said softly, "I never thought I would see you again." Keanu froze. His breath caught in his chest. He knew this voice. It was someone from his past, someone whose words had once left wounds that never fully healed. Anna and Sydney looked at him, sensing the tension in his body. Sydney whispered, "Who is he?" Keanu's voice was low, almost broken. "Someone who once called himself my friend, and then became the loudest voice against me when I needed silence most." The man stepped closer, rain dripping from his coat. "I was wrong back then," he said. "But tonight, when I saw what happened in the restaurant, I remembered the words I threw at you years ago, and I realized they were the same as theirs. I came to say, I am sorry." The world seemed to pause again, the storm holding its breath around them. Keanu's silence returned, heavier than ever before. This was not the silence of patience, nor the silence of humility. It was the silence of old wounds reopening. Anna placed her other hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to answer tonight," she whispered. "Sometimes forgiveness takes more courage than silence." Sydney's voice followed, soft but strong. But if you find it in your heart, maybe this moment can turn pain into hope for more than just him. Maybe for you, too. Keanu lifted his eyes slowly, looking at the man who once broke his trust. His face was calm, but inside his heart battled between the memory of pain and the chance for healing. And as the rain poured harder, he took a slow breath, knowing that what he chose to do next would change not only the night, but also the meaning of silence he had carried all his life. The rain poured heavier, the sound filling the silence that stretched between Keanu and the man from his past. Anna and Sydney stayed close, their presence like anchors keeping him steady, but they did not speak. They knew this was a choice only he could make. Keanu stared at the man, his face calm, but his eyes carried storms. Years of memory rose inside him, days when this man was by his side, sharing laughter, sharing dreams, and nights when betrayal cut those bonds apart. The words spoken long ago still echoed, words that told him he was not strong enough, that his grief was weakness, that his silence was emptiness. The man lowered his head, his voice trembling. I was young. I was foolish. I thought strength meant being loud, being proud. When you lost people you loved, I should have stood with you. Instead, I pushed you down because I could not carry my own fear. I see it now. I see how wrong I was. For a long moment, Keanu did not reply. His silence was not empty. It was heavy, like the weight of years pressing against his chest. Anna's hand on his shoulder grew firmer, reminding him he was not standing alone anymore. Sydney's eyes stayed fixed on him, filled with quiet strength, as if she was holding part of his burden with her gaze. Finally, Keanu spoke, his voice soft but steady. You cannot take back the words. They lived with me, shaped me, made me question myself. But tonight, I see something else. I see that even those who hurt us can change, if they are willing to face the truth. The man looked up slowly, his eyes wet not only from the rain but from the weight of regret. Then can you forgive me? Keanu lowered his head, his breath heavy. Forgiveness was not simple. Forgiveness was not erasing pain. Forgiveness was letting go of its grip, choosing not to let it define every step forward. He finally whispered, I cannot forget, but I can forgive. Not because you ask, but because I do not want to carry this wound anymore. The man's shoulders shook, his face breaking into silent tears. He tried to speak, but no words came. He simply bowed his head, as if the weight of forgiveness was heavier than the weight of his guilt. Anna smiled gently. Sometimes, forgiveness heals not only the one who receives it, but also the one who gives it. Sydney added, and tonight, you showed that silence can lead to something greater than pain. It can lead to peace. For the first time in years, Keanu felt a small part of his heart loosen, as though chains he had carried quietly were beginning to fall away. His silence no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a choice that led him toward healing. The man turned to leave, his steps slow, his head still bowed. But before he disappeared into the rain, he looked back and said, You gave me hope tonight. I will not waste it. Then he vanished into the storm. Keanu sat back down on the bench, the rain soaking his clothes, but he did not mind. He felt lighter, though his eyes still carried sadness. Anna leaned her head slightly toward him and whispered, You gave him hope, but you also gave it to yourself. Sydney nodded, her voice warm. You faced insult, you faced pride, and now you faced betrayal. Each time you chose respect. Each time you chose kindness. This is not weakness, Keanu. This is the kind of strength the world forgets, but the world needs most. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, letting the rain wash over his face. For the first time in a long while, his silence did not feel like something he had to explain. It felt like something people understood. Yet deep inside, he knew the night was not done. The storm outside mirrored the storm within the world. As much as forgiveness healed, there would always be voices that doubted, moments that tested. And the final test of this night was still waiting, one that would not only challenge Keanu, but also Anna and Sydney together. The rain slowed as the night grew deeper, the storm giving way to a soft drizzle. The streetlights flickered against the wet pavement, and the quiet felt almost sacred. Keanu sat on the bench with Anna and Sydney beside him, the three of them breathing in the stillness that followed after pain, after forgiveness, after storms that test the heart. Keanu lifted his face to the sky, the water sliding down his skin like a quiet cleansing. His silence was no longer heavy. It carried meaning, a choice, a strength that had grown through insult, through cruelty, through betrayal, and finally, through forgiveness. Anna looked at him with calm eyes. Tonight, you showed everyone what true strength looks like. Not in anger, not in pride, but in kindness that does not break. Sydney added softly, people will forget words shouted in anger, but they will not forget dignity that holds steady, even when the world tries to crush it. Keanu gave them both a faint smile, one that carried gratitude. You stood with me when I could not stand alone. Your voices turned my silence into hope. Tonight, it was not just me. It was all of us. As they sat together, the young waiter from the restaurant appeared, running down the street with an umbrella in his hand. He looked nervous but determined. Sir, he said breathlessly, holding the umbrella out to Keanu. You dropped this inside. I thought you might need it. Keanu looked at the boy and his heart softened. Here was a small act of kindness, but it carried the same weight as all the great words spoken tonight. He gently took the umbrella, not because he needed it, but because he wanted the boy to know his effort mattered. Thank you, he said softly. You are braver than you know. The boy's eyes lit up, and for a moment he stood taller, as if those words gave him strength he would carry far beyond this night. The old woman from the restaurant also appeared, slowly making her way with the help of her cane. She smiled at them, her eyes kind despite the rain. I wanted to tell you, she said, her voice fragile but steady, that what you did tonight will not be forgotten. People like me, people who watch quietly, we carry stories like this in our hearts. They remind us the world can still be gentle. Her words filled the space around them, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was full, alive, and deeply human. Keanu felt something shift inside him, something he had not felt in years. He realized that silence had not been his prison. It had been his gift. When others insulted, he gave patience. When others mocked, he gave calm. When betrayal returned, he gave forgiveness. And in doing so, he gave the world something it rarely saw, hope born from humility. Anna whispered, Tonight we learned that one act of kindness, one moment of patience, can change more than we know. Sydney added, The men who mocked you will remember, even if they never admit it. The boy will remember. The old woman will remember. And we will carry it too. Keanu looked at them both, his eyes gentle but strong. And when the world tests us again, we will answer not with anger, but with the same choice we made tonight. The rain finally stopped, leaving only the quiet sound of dripping water on the streets. Dawn began to touch the horizon faintly, a reminder that even the darkest nights give way to light. Keanu, Anna, and Sydney stood together, the three of them bound not by fame or by chance, but by the simple truth that kindness, respect, and resilience can turn insult into hope. And as they walked away from the empty street, the night behind them no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a story that belonged not just to them, but to everyone who believed that dignity was stronger than cruelty, that silence was not weakness, and that hope, even whispered, could outlast all noise.